Let's get into this Dennis Prager, Charlie Kirk story because this is very telling. We have been talking about the issues with TPUSA, especially ever since Erica Kirk has taken the reins here. A lot of things have been exposed. The financials have been exposed, right? The way they started and what it turned into has been exposed. And Erica has definitely been exposed. But we cannot talk about this without talking about Dennis Prager. Because Dennis Prager is not only very much attached to Turning Point USA. Dennis Prager was Charlie Kirk's mentor, and he was also Candace Owens' mentor. And when you see what he's really about, I think you'll start to understand why this so-called, this pro-Israel push and message became such a critical part of Turning Point USA. Let's go back first, shall we? Dennis Prager, he announced this before. If all I did was influence Charlie Kirk, I've influenced millions. Dennis Prager, September 2025. Dennis Prager, why would he say this, right? If all he did was influence Charlie Kirk, he's influenced millions. Do you know why? Well, if Charlie Kirk is speaking at thousands of kids at these colleges, then Dennis Prager is basically using Charlie Kirk as a vessel to reach millions of people, to spread that message. More importantly, the pro-Israel message. Dennis Prager, if you look a little bit closely, here's another example. Again, very much attached to Turning Point USA. Health, wealth, and happiness is back. Charlie Kirk and Dennis Prager will be speaking at Arizona State University on September 27th. This was that announcement there. Because I think it's important that when we talk about Turning Point USA financials, I think we need to dig into PragerU's financials as well, especially someone like Dennis Prager, who was very much influential. Now, a while back, someone had pointed to me that Candace Owens said that she looks back on it and she believes that her and Charlie Kirk may have had handlers. What if one of those handlers was Dennis Prager? I want to take you back to a time here during one of these fireside moments that Dennis Prager had here with Charlie Kirk. Let me line this up here for a second. They talked about Israel. Israel comes up here in the conversation, and I'll show you how far back this is. We'll get into like the 28 mark, because I think this is important. This was on PragerU. This was 7 years ago, right? Listen to this.
Totally do. Look, I'm a big fan of Mormon.
And so this was one, and I've done so much thinking about this when I was younger. What were some of the themes that was taught to me and just beat like a drum? And one of them is the world is a worse place because of Jews and Christians. That was one of the things that I was taught
right. And it would be much better if we were in a post-religious age.
That's right. So it was. Yes. It's the lies about the Crusades and the evils of Christianity.
Well, you know what I say, because I in this sense I can say it more easily than you because I'm not Christian. So I say, well, so wait a minute. And I wrote a book on anti-Semitism, which has a big chapter on Christian anti-Semitism. I know all about it. I taught courses on Jewish history at college, on the college level.
He knows all about it. He wrote a book about it. He taught courses on the college level about it.
Nevertheless, the fact that you have to go back to the 15th century, that's a long time ago.
That's correct.
The Spanish Inquisition, that was in 1492. Okay, so the Christian record since 1500 isn't so bad.
That's right.
If you have to go back to 1492, and wait a minute, and who abolished slavery?
Well, and
Atheists?
who formed America?
Yes.
Religious refugees from Europe
Yes.
that wanted to form their own colonies
yes.
around specific forms of Christianity.
That is correct.
So you get the point here, guys. So this was 7 years ago, right? So this is who Dennis Prager is. Now, let's get into a little bit more history about him. Again, he was a mentor to Charlie Kirk and apparently at one point to Candace Owens as well. We need to look at this a little bit closer because I do think his message resonated with quite a few. Now, let's look at something here. I want to show you some connections. Dennis Prager, he's from Brooklyn. He is the latter son of Polish Jewish immigrants. Prager and his brother, Kenneth Prager, were raised in a modern Orthodox Jewish home. He attended the yeshiva of Flatbush in Brooklyn, New York. He went to Brooklyn College. I'm familiar with that school. You know where else he went to school? Columbia University. I would say, which was like the epicenter of the college pro-Palestinian protests. Columbia University. So I'd be willing to assume he's probably donated money to Columbia University at some point in time. Now, follow with me here. Let's go on a little bit further. The start of Prager's career overlapped with the growing tendency among American Jews who had been staunchly liberal to move towards the center and some to the right, driven in part by the influx of Jews from the Soviet Union. So some of the things that he did in 1979, he published an introduction to Judaism intended for non-observant Jews, the 9 questions people ask about Judaism. This is his whole brand. Like, watch this. Prager ran the Brandeis Bardin Institute from 1976 to 1983. It was Prager's first salary job. He soon earned a reputation as a moral critic, denouncing secularism and narcissism, both of which he said are destroying society. Some people called him the Jewish Billy Graham. Now, for those of you who grew up in the church, you probably heard of Billy Graham at some point in time. So Billy Graham was known for like missionary work. He traveled all over the world to spread the message of Christianity. So they are going on to say that Dennis Prager was known as the Jewish Billy Graham. That's how influential Dennis Prager has been. So imagine if you're Charlie Kirk and this is now your mentor. Think about that for just a second. We want to go to another part here. We're not going to go through this whole thing. I have a lineup here that I want to go through as well. But look at this. Prager supported Jimmy Carter in the 1976 election. In 1994, the ADL published a report on anti-Semitism in the Christian right movement. Prager, who was aligned with the social and political conservatism of the Christian right, criticized the ADL in its report. In 1995, he urged conservative Jews to be open working with conservative Christians. This is important because I feel like that's a big part of the evangelical, right? So the evangelical Christians, he was a big part of that they should be open to working with the Christians as well. We go on a little bit here and come down to this part. PragerU. Prager and his producer, Alan Estrin, started a website called PragerU. Despite what its name suggests, PragerU is not an academic institution, but rather creates videos on various topics from a conservative perspective. BuzzFeed News, at the time, described PragerU as one of the biggest and most influential and yet least understood forces in online media. As of 2018, it spent around 40% of its annual $10 million budget on marketing, as each video is produced according to a consistent style. Videos cover different topics here. We all know about that if you're familiar with PragerU. But they called it one of the biggest and most influential and yet least understood forces of online media. Let's look at PragerU's finances. Right here. The organization depends on donations to produce its content. Much of PragerU's early funding came from fracking billionaires Dan and Ferris Wilks. 2 members of the Wilks family sit on PragerU's board. The next largest donor is Lynn and Harry Bradley Foundation. That's important. This is where the money's coming from. Other donors include the Morgan Family Foundation, Fidelity Charitable Gift Fund, Donors Trust, and the late Republican donor, Sheldon Adelson. So one of the donors for PragerU was Miriam Adelson's husband. You literally have people donating to PragerU that not only were pro-Israel, but are just staunch Zionists and support everything that Israel was doing. Same people who donated to Donald Trump. And you have this guy who ran PragerU being a mentor to Charlie Kirk. Dennis Prager, to me, not only had that influence on Charlie Kirk, but it's almost as if he had an investment in Turning Point USA. And part of that investment would be that his message was also going to be spread through TPUSA, which is a pro-Israel message. Like I said, people don't donate just to be nice. People donate because they want an investment and they want something in return. Now, more donors here. Leroy Mitchell and the Minnesota-based Sid and Carol Verdorn Foundation. That was led by C.H. Robinson, CEO Sid Verdorn. Major support is also provided by the National Christian Foundation and the Dick and Betsy DeVos Family Foundation. We have more detailed information I'm going to show you as well, because what this basically points to is that a lot of times this is all connecting back to Zionism. Because imagine if Dennis Prager had not been involved in Turning Point USA. Imagine if Dennis Prager was not a mentor to Charlie Kirk. Things could have been very different. Let's look at this part here. I want you to hear what Dennis Prager said about people saying Jesus was a Palestinian. Listen to the language.
And now you have Jesus was not a Jew. He was a Palestinian. If you'd have said to Jesus, "Are you a Palestinian?" he would have said, "Excuse me, what?" The term was not even known. The Hebrew, Plishtim, sounds like Palestinian, but they were considered vanquished and gone from history when Israel entered Canaan. He was crucified by the Romans as the king of the Jews. That was the term. His entire mission was to the Jews.
So that's the message that Dennis Prager was spreading about Israel and about the Palestinian people. And that was Charlie Kirk's mentor. I'm showing you this to show you where some of the rhetoric that he had before he started to, question things, it probably came from him. Now, we're going to go through a timeline of things here. And thank you. Shout out to the individual who sent me this, because someone really broke this down for me, and we're going to dive into this on the show. In the last video, I was talking about the woman who made these statements in her car, and she was talking about how upset she was with Charlie Kirk at that Tampa event, right? So that woman, it turns out, I said she was like probably one of the donors, but according to this, she's one of the people that is involved in fundraising. So let's break this down. Start with the recent changes at TPUSA leadership. TPUSA donor and organizational landscape shifted significantly in late 2025 following the death of its founder, Charlie Kirk, in September 2025. The organization is currently led by his wife, Erica Kirk, who became CEO after his passing. Current major donors frequently cited in 2025 reports include Steve Wynn, Thomas Klingenstein, and organizations like, once again, the Bradley Impact Fund. There is no evidence from publicly available information that Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, which is PJTN, receives funding from the same major donors who contribute to Turning Point USA. However, PJTN donors, it receives funding from sources primarily focused on pro-Israel and anti-BDS advocacy, as well as evangelical and Jewish community donors. Noteworthy donors and affiliated individuals include, this is where we get back to Dennis Prager, the Irving Moskowitz Foundation, Larry Hochberg, former chair of the Friends of the IDF, Dennis Prager, conservative talk radio host, Adam Milstein, Israeli-American businessman. Grants have also reportedly been approved by the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs. So once again, when you follow the money, you see where a lot of this is leading back to. Dennis Prager, once again. So what I'm saying is, when you have money coming in from people that are a part of organizations where one of the people is a friend of the IDF, and you have Dennis Prager, who 100% wrote a whole book about anti-Semitism and all these things, taught courses about this, that money coming in was going to lead a certain narrative in Turning Point USA. Let's get to this other part here. We talked about the TPUSA donors, right? It goes on to say here, while individual donors like Dennis Prager have connections to both spheres, there is no overlap among the major funding organizations or foundations that provide substantial, consistent funding to both groups based on available tax reports and news reports. PJTN's funding appears to be more specifically tied to pro-Israel causes, while TPUSA donor base is broadly focused on conservative youth activism and policy. So let's get into the Prager part. Early activism for Soviet Jewry. In 1969, while studying in England, Dennis Prager was recruited by the Israeli government to smuggle Jewish religious items into the Soviet Union and smuggle out the names of Jews wishing to immigrate to Israel. Following this, he became a national spokesman for the Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry, a movement closely aligned with Israeli interests. This goes all the way back to 1969 with Dennis Prager. So this isn't something that started yesterday. So we're talking about someone that, this is why I say, when Candace said that they had handlers, is it possible that Dennis Prager was one of those handlers? Is it possible that Dennis Prager was Hasbara? We go on here. Prager used pro-Israel curriculum. Through his media organization, PragerU produces and promotes content that supports the state of Israel. There's educational outreach. Their curriculum includes lessons for young children on Israeli innovations like the Iron Dome. Israel at War series. The organization provides high-volume video series such as the Israel at War and Middle East Problem series, which argue that Israel is a moral democratic outpost in a hostile region. State partnerships. PragerU's pro-Israel materials have been approved for use in public schools and several U.S. states, including Florida and Oklahoma. So now we see these teachings from Dennis Prager have managed to creep their way into public schools. This is a problem. And this is how involved this is, folks. Because if you indoctrinate the youth, you've managed to shape the future. Goes on to say here, 3, ideological defense of Zionism. Prager frequently articulates a Judeo-Christian worldview that positions Israel as a central pillar of Western civilization. Civilization defense. He and PragerU CEO Marissa Straight describe Israel as the Iron Dome of the West, serving as a front line against radicalism that threatens the United States. So he pushes the narrative that Israel has to exist to protect the U.S. from everybody else. Now, when you have common sense and you know that a lot of the weapons, most of the weapons that Israel even gets comes from the U.S., does that make any sense to you? Why would the U.S., which has been helping Israel, why would they need Israel to protect the U.S.? But this is the indoctrination. Anti-Semitism. Prager asserts that anti-Zionism and the desire to destroy the Jewish state are anti-Semitic. So there's that conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. Moral clarity. He rejects moral equivalence in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, arguing that Israel is the good guy in a struggle where one side wants peace and the other wants destruction. Personal and theological ties. Religious scholarship. As a Jewish theologian, Prager's books emphasize that Jewish identity is inseparable from both a religious and a national Zionist component. Again, adopting that new definition of anti-Semitism, where you can't have one without the other, according to him. So basically, if you have a problem with Israel's government, Israel as a state, he would still deem you as anti-Semitic. In other words, you would not be allowed to criticize Israel at all. Again, he mentored Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk. And we'll get to the Candace part in just a second because things changed there. Frequent traveler. Prager has traveled extensively to Israel and maintains a close public dialogue with Israeli leaders and military figures, frequently featuring them in his media program. Connection to the IDF. He is frequently characterized as an instrument of Israeli Hasbara, public diplomacy, or explanation. Through his relationship with the Israeli government is primarily ideological rather than that of a formal employee or an agent. Here's his connection to the state of Israel. Prager's connection to Israeli government dates back to 1969 when we talked about the Soviet Union there. The role in consciousness warfare. Critics and observers in 2025 increasingly categorize Prager and his organization as key players in what Israeli officials have termed consciousness warfare. Media impact. PragerU serves as a massive platform for pro-Israel content, reaching hundreds of millions of viewers. Its curriculum includes pro-Israel materials, such as kindergarten lessons on the Iron Dome, which have been officially approved for use in several states. Again, kindergarten lessons on the Iron Dome. This goes way back. This is deeper than what people think it is. Because if you can get into the public school system, I mean, you're reaching a lot of people. It goes on to say here, defense of government actions. In 2024 and 2025, Prager has been a vocal defender of Israel's military actions in Gaza and Lebanon, arguing against calls for Netanyahu's resignation and comparing groups like Hamas to the Nazis. So he's not even one of those people that says, well, you can criticize the government, but not the state or the people. He supports Benjamin Netanyahu. Public and critical perception. The Hasbara label. Critics describe his rhetoric such as his assertion that Gaza started the war to kill as many Israelis as possible during appearances at venues like the Oxford Union, as pure propaganda aimed at whitewashing military occupation. Strategic alignment. While there's no public evidence of direct financial asset status, Prager's work directly advances the goals of the Israeli Foreign Ministry's 2025 Hasbara budget, which has increased by 150 million specifically to target American campuses and social media. And that's where Charlie Kirk comes in, right? Because he was that vehicle that they could use to target the college campus kids. Internal criticism. Even within the Jewish community, his approach has been polarizing. Groups like the ADL have previously criticized him for diminishing the complexity of anti-Semitism in America to serve political narratives. In short, while Prager operates as an independent American media figure, his lifelong activities, PragerU's curriculum, and his current role in the global PR efforts for the state of Israel lead many critics to deem him a functional Hasbara asset. Prager's relationship with Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens in regards to Israel Hasbara is characterized by his deliberate effort to mentor them as pro-Israel voices, though the outcomes for each differed significantly in 2025. When you look at his mentorship and influence on Charlie Kirk, admitted influence in September 2025. So that goes back to that graphic that I showed you here. If all I did was influence Charlie Kirk, I've influenced millions. Then we go forward here. Pro-Israel advocacy. For much of his career, Kirk was considered a staunchly pro-Israel conservative whose views were rooted in his faith. 2025 tensions. Shortly before his assassination in 2025, leaked text messages confirmed as authentic by Turning Point USA showed Kirk felt immense pressure from pro-Israel donors. He expressed frustration that they were playing into all the stereotypes and stated he had felt forced to leave the pro-Israel cause after losing 2 million donation for refusing to cancel Tucker Carlson. So this is when the shift starts, right? Recruitment and fallout with Candace Owens. Candace Owens was formally recruited and platformed by PragerU early in her career, but by 2024 and 2025, she had become a primary antagonist to the Hasbara mission. And it's true, you can still probably find some of those older videos of Candace Owens on PragerU from back in the day, right? Earlier career, Prager and Ben Shapiro were credited with helping launch Owens' career, initially defending her as an ally. Ideological rupture. Following October 7th, Owens shifted significantly, refusing to condemn Hamas massacre and frequently clashing with pro-Israel figures. Conspiracy theories. By late 2025, Owens became a vocal critic of the Hasbara machine, alleging that powerful pro-Israel interests had pressured Kirk and even insinuating Israeli involvement with his murder, allegedly. Prager's defense and regrets. While Prager initially defended Owens, critics noticed his deafening silence as her rhetoric became more hostile toward Israel. By late 2024, Prager attempted to change her mind through a detailed open letter, which she reportedly ignored. So this guy was not only, of course, he's not just a powerful person, but he was not only just mentoring Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens. This guy is fixated on the educational system to indoctrinate young people from early on to support the Iron Dome. If they're teaching some of PragerU's curriculum in public schools, we got a problem. Now, this is where the parents would have to come in and educate their kids at home to push back against this, but we got a problem. I think he may have been the one. He may have been the one that was a quote unquote handler. So we got to look at this for everything that it is. The Hasbara assets in the 2025 landscape. In the context of 2025 discourse, the term Hasbara asset is used by both sides of the conflict. The critics' view use it to describe influencers like Kirk pre-2025 and organizations like PragerU that they believe are paid or pressured to promote Israeli interests. Pro-Israel view, figures like Seth Mandel argue the idea of a Hasbara colossus pulling the strings of an army of media plants is a conspiracy theory, noting that Kirk himself had written Netanyahu out of concern that Israel exerted too little influence on social media. So, through everything that we have talked about, all the people involved with Turning Point USA, we cannot forget about Dennis Prager, someone who had tremendous resources, tremendous influence, the networks that he needed to get started there, but also the way that he was connected to Turning Point USA. And I would imagine that this is probably where Charlie Kirk got it from. So it wasn't just Israel, Netanyahu, evangelical Christians, and other donors that had something to lose if Charlie Kirk moved away from the pro-Israel position, or even when he was questioning what Israel was doing and asking, is it possible that Israel chose to stand down on October 7th? It also means that Dennis Prager had something to lose. And PragerU possibly. Because now all of a sudden you run the risk of this guy who's speaking to thousands of college students is starting to question what Israel is doing. But I mentored him to go out there and to push the pro-Israel message, to influence people at a young age. This is why some of these donors, I believe, latched on to Turning Point USA, because they want to get them when they're young. So if you can get to them when they're younger, you can get that ball going. People need to look at Dennis Prager. And a lot of this is public, or some of it is public, that I talked about today. But a good amount of it, even for me, I never took the time to read it. And when you look at his connections, this is what I was saying. He speaks English, French, Russian, and Hebrew. His brother is a physician at Columbia University. And we know Dennis also went to Columbia University. Like I said, that school was ground zero for the pro-Palestinian protest. And then if you look at his nephew is a former writer for the Wall Street Journal. So you got corporate media connection as well. Now, apparently he suffered a spinal cord injury in 2024, but you can look at the books. Look at the books. The 9 questions people ask about Judaism. Think a second time. Happiness is a serious problem. A human nature repair manual. Why the Jews? The reason for anti-Semitism. 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments Part 2. The Rational Bible, Exodus, Genesis. So you see what most of his work has been about. And his goal was to use Turning Point USA as well to push that message. And they were going to spread that pro-Israel message to millions of people. So it's getting really bad for Turning Point USA. People are asking me, did I see the new Wolves and Finance video? Not just yet. I have to check that out. But I will tell you this. It's just not looking good for Turning Point USA. Like I said, at the end of the day, I don't think this is going to end well. They're literally on tour right now with a guy who is accused of trafficking. And the more people look at their finances, I think more and more questions are going to come up, are going to be raised. But these are the times that we're living in. And check this, peep this, guys. if it had not been for the death of Charlie Kirk, a lot of this doesn't even get looked into. There's some powerful people out there, guys. And I just, we can end it with this here. If all I did was influence Charlie Kirk, I've influenced millions. And that was his goal. Who writes the textbooks for our schools? That's a good question, the truth lady. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.